Have you ever wondered what really happens inside an isolated psychiatric clinic? Not the ones that appear in the newspapers, but the ones that should never be discovered. Those where reality is manipulated, where identities are molded like dough, and where patients themselves don't even know who they are anymore. This is no ordinary tale of madness. It's a story of surveillance, mental dissociation, and a kind of silent torture that corrodes from within, where the greatest danger lies not in the bars, but in the memories. The worst kind of prison is the one where you believe you are undergoing treatment. Muffled sound, old tape playing, a man's voice whispering, broken. "I'm 6. I know what they did to me." Ethan wakes up, drenched in sweat, eyes wide as if ripped from a nightmare. But there was no dream there. Just a deformed reality, embedded in every detail of the white room. He stands up slowly, every muscle trembling as if carrying the weight of memories that don't belong to him. Ethan Walters, 34 años, accused of a crime he swears he didn't commit. Hospitalized after a collapse, after repeating dozens of times that the surveillance tapes had been manipulated, that the voice on the recording was not his. Nobody believed it. Or worse, they pretended not to believe it. The place where he is now has no name, at least not one that is said out loud. It's dawn. The silence in the clinic is not calm, it's oppressive, and the hallway seems narrower with every step. The fluorescent light flashes at meticulously programmed intervals, as if every blink was a reminder. You are being watched, but there is a room, there always has been, at the end of the hall, where the red light never goes out. The door is frosted glass like the others, but something has been scraped on it. A name, a warning, there's no way to know, but Ethan feels it. Deep down, he recognizes it. Patient 06. The pulse quickens, blood pounds inside the skull, and, even without wanting to, he gets closer. With his forehead pressed against the cold door, he listens. And what you hear paralyzes every cell in your body. Your own voice, coming from inside the room. It's not a memory. It's not a hallucination. It's real. The tape is playing, and he's there, saying things he never said. His hand shakes. The eyes look for a camera, a microphone, any logical explanation. But there is no logic there. There is no reason. Just the raw, cutting feeling that everything he's experienced so far could have been fabricated. The ground seems to sink beneath your feet. The red light flashes, 1, 2, 3 times, as if counting the final beats of something that has yet to begin, and then absolute silence, as if even time itself was holding its breath. Are you still there? Because if you've come this far, get ready. This is the part where the masks come off, or worse, in which you discover there never was one. In the cold room with pale tiles, the clock on the wall turned at a normal pace, but nothing there seemed to keep track of time. Ethan sat in the metal chair in front of the doctor's desk. His hands rested in his lap, but his fingers twitched as if they were digging for something invisible. His gaze trembled, not with fear, but with uncomfortable recognition. He didn't want to be there. Or maybe I wanted to. Maybe part of it was needing to hear what was never said. The psychiatrist watched him silently, her eyes too soft for a mind so trained in emotional destruction. Ethan hated her silence. It was like a two-sided mirror. He spoke, and she reflected what he wanted to hide. Until, in a burst of exhaustion, he said in a hoarse but firm voice, "If patient 06 doesn't exist, why do I keep dreaming about him?" The question seemed to vibrate in the air, filling every crack in the room. For a second, even the sound of the air conditioning stopped. Dr. Cass responded with a tone that could very well have come from a rehearsed script, "Because maybe he's part of you." That sentence was like a key turning inside an old lock. Ethan's body didn't move, but inside him something opened. Images came like sharp blades cutting through the line of reason. He was back in that closet, small, maybe 7 years old, knees bent against the chest, the door ajar. Outside, screams that sounded like familiar voices, but deformed. A woman was crying, a man whispered cruel things, and then silence. That silence. Always the same silence, the same one that filled the room now. But there was more. There was a shadow, not a figure. A shadow, something that passed in front of the door without ever entering, something I knew was there but chose not to see. And suddenly, as if time were just a poorly told excuse, the voice appeared again. It wasn't Dr. Cass's, it wasn't his, it was from inside. And at the same time, from outside. You know his name, always have, but you're afraid to say it. Ethan's body froze. His shoulders were shaking, but he didn't move. That voice, it wasn't a memory, it was a presence. A consciousness lodged in the cracks of your own mind. There, in front of that woman who pretended to care for him, Ethan felt like he was no longer a patient. It was a piece of something bigger, a living cog within a psychological system where the truth was diluted in therapeutic doses. That same morning, he wandered through the clinic's hallways as if he were in a lucid dream. Each door looked identical, but each step took him to a different place. There was a strange smell in the air. It wasn't disinfectant, it was metallic, as if the blood itself was impregnated on the walls. The lights flickered, the cameras changed positions. It wasn't paranoia, it was method. Everything there worked like a theater of control, and he was both spectator and protagonist. In the cafeteria, patients seemed to act out their illnesses. They repeated behaviors like poorly directed actors. One swayed his body incessantly, as if marking a non-existent time. Another mumbled the numbers of a code that was useless, except perhaps to activate memories. Ethan sat in a corner, observed, and when one of the patients bumped into him and dropped a folded note, he knew it was nothing more than a coincidence. The handwriting on the paper was shaky but clear. Patient 06 is still active. You need to remember. Ethan's mind silently collapsed. The fragments began to collide with each other. The memories, the voices, the erased faces. Everything gained weight, as if something was pushing him against the inner walls of his own brain. Later, in his clinical cell, he stared in the mirror. The reflection no longer looked like him. There were deep circles under his eyes, wounds on the sides of his face that he didn't remember getting. And the scar under his chin, was it always there? The voice returned. You cannot erase what has been programmed. Programmed. That word should not belong to a human being. But there, it made sense. Enough to hurt. He took 2 steps back. The mirror was still there. And then, in a barely perceptible whisper, a new phrase appeared. Not said out loud, but written on the glass itself, as if condensed in the vapor of breath. Patient 06 is the observer. He shouted, but no one came, or maybe they had come, and just watched. Hours later, while rereading his own records, or what was left of them, Ethan realized that several pages were missing. The medical notes skipped days, weeks skipped. Diagnoses changed tone. Now he had a stable case of dissociative disorder, now an extreme case of simulation. Nothing made sense. Or maybe it would. But not in the way he wanted. The next night he tried to sleep. But sleep was no longer a refuge. It was a trap. He dreamed of corridors that doubled in on themselves, with doors that opened to the same place, with him, looking at himself, wearing medical team clothes. And the worst part, in the dream, he was the only one who didn't scream. Everyone else was gagged. When he woke up, he felt the metallic taste of blood in his mouth, and next to the pillow, there was something that shouldn't be there, a fragment of cassette tape, with your name written in hand. Ethan didn't know what was true anymore, but I knew one thing. If patient 06 never existed, then someone, or something, was trying to make him remember it all along, or worse, making you forget. And now, every step he took toward the restricted wing seemed to push him not out of the nightmare, but into a much scarier truth, because sometimes the real psychopath isn't the one who screams. He is the one who observes in silence. And if you're listening to this now, maybe you've already crossed that line too. If you started to distrust reality, it's because they're already close. The only way to keep your consciousness active is to follow this line until the end. Subscribe to the channel before they shut everything down or delete you too. The paper was charred at the edges, as if someone had tried to erase the truth in a hurry, but not hard enough. The surviving letters formed a title that hammered into Ethan's mind like an impossible-to-ignore verdict. Patient 06, Extraordinary Observation. He held the socket as if he were touching a piece torn from reality itself. The document even had a photo, pasted in the top corner. The image was blurry, distorted by the heat of the flames, but the shape of his face, the line of his jaw, the look that stared into the lens as if he knew everything, was his. It was him, without a shadow of a doubt. For a moment, Ethan felt the ground spinning beneath his feet. That wasn't a clue, it was a sentence, something that someone, or something, wanted to hide, but for some reason let it slip. Like a test, as if the system itself was allowing him to advance one more level. Without thinking twice, he tore up the rest of the form with shaking hands and ran down the clinic's corridors, crossing rooms, ignoring clinical looks, rotating cameras, the echoes of voices that fell silent as he passed. His bare feet stepped on the cold and damp ground with the speed of someone who was not running away, but running straight into the abyss. He reached the bathroom in the restricted section, a place avoided by almost all patients. Inside, the smell of rust mixed with expired disinfectant. The light flickered on the ceiling. The mirror, large and aged, seemed to breathe with the room. He approached. His image on the glass was unclear. It was blurry. There was something wrong with the reflection. The features were blurred. The eyes looked like someone else's. The movements didn't follow precisely. It was as if the mirror showed a version of him, disconnected. And that's when he saw it. In the lower left corner of the glass, something began to form, as if an invisible hand was drawing with the room's own condensation. "You are 6. 3 words. 3 words like a death sentence. He backed away, tripping over his own foot, his back hitting the cold wall behind him. He tried to speak, but his throat was dry as if it had never been used, his eyes fixed on the reflection once more. And it was at that moment that everything froze. The light in the room flickered. Once. Twice. In the third, there was a silhouette behind him. Stop. Property. High. No face. The shadow did not belong to anyone present there. Ethan turned around in panic, but there was no one. The space behind him was empty. Only silence filled the air, the kind of silence that feels like shouting. But the mirror still showed the figure there, as if the presence only existed for those who dared to see. His chest heaved. The mind spun between madness and logic, between instinct and denial. He slowly brought his hand closer to the mirror, as if trying to touch his own soul to see if it was still there. But when his fingers touched the glass, nothing happened, except for one thing. The reflection smiled. Ethan, in the real world, was in shock, but Ethan in the mirror smiled. It wasn't an ordinary smile. It was something crooked, calculated, like someone who finally saw their puppet wake up. And then, out of the corner of his eye, he noticed the camera high on the wall was facing him directly, static, leaning as if watching a private show. And for the first time, he didn't feel like he was being watched. He felt like he was being remembered, reminded of something he himself created. The inner voice whispered again, firmer this time, with a commanding tone. "Stop running away. You know who you are." The heart was beating too hard. He leaned against the sink, head down, beads of sweat falling. "I tried to breathe, I tried to deny it, but the mind wouldn't let me." Images began to emerge violently. Flashes of a dark room, him standing in front of a wall of monitors, watching recordings of other patients. Your voice giving orders. A badge on your chest written observer. A patient screaming in despair. Ethan responding coldly. Dr. Cass in the background taking notes. Ava looking from afar. With a look that wasn't pity. It was complicity. All of this played through his mind like a movie without a remote control. The plug burns out. The distorted photo, the voices, the childhood closet, the mirror, in the shade, everything connected. And now, he was beginning to understand that maybe, just maybe, Patient 06 never existed. Why he is, and always has been, the reason for everything. But then, why does the clinic insist on hiding him from himself? Why so many contradictory records? Why do other patients speak in codes that he recognizes before he even hears them? That morning, he didn't return to his room. He walked through the halls like a ghost. No fear, no rush. The lights came on as he passed. The cameras followed him in silence, until a door that had never been opened before opened on its own. Inside, there was a monitor lit. "Hey guys." A video playing. Ethan sitting, facing the camera, talking to someone, maybe with himself, maybe with you, maybe with all of us. The monitor flickered with greenish tones and streaks of static noise, as if time was being rewound in digital fragments. Ethan kept his eyes fixed on the screen, even though every fiber of his body was begging him to look away. But there, in the archived security records, was something he needed to see, something that might explain why everything seemed to fall apart, inside and outside his mind. The images showed corridors similar to the ones he walked through every day, but something about the details seemed off. The colors were washed out, the contrast excessive, and the movements slightly delayed, as if the time within those recordings obeyed other rules, rules that were not made to be understood by someone who still believed they were undergoing treatment. And then, there he was, or rather, someone with your face. But the look was different, firmer, more aware. There was no fear in that Ethan's eyes. There was no paranoia, tremors, or confusion. There was control, precision, intention. In the recording, he walked through the corridors like someone who knows every secret behind the walls. "I went by patients, took notes, talked to doctors." Ethan froze. The image of the other him turned directly to the camera and said something inaudible. But even without sound, he understood. It was an order, an instruction given with authority, with familiarity. Ethan's heart was beating wildly. His eyes searched for details, for any proof of manipulation, editing cuts, continuity flaws, anything that betrayed a forgery, a hoax, an attempt at psychological sabotage. But everything was technically perfect. More than perfect. It was too real. These images don't exist, or maybe they're the only real ones. The voice within whispered these words, and they seemed to merge with the muffled sound of old tapes being rewound somewhere far away, as if the past were being reconstructed before him. But rebuilt by whom? Distorted laughter began to emerge from the room's speakers. They were not natural laughter. They were superimposed, edited, manipulated. Laughter that didn't come from the throat. It came from circuits. They echoed like digital ghosts, crossing the space with an invisible presence. And then the whispers started, words spoken in a low tone, words that seemed to have been taken from his own dreams. Ethan took a step back, then another. The temperature in the room dropped abruptly. His breath condensed in the air. The cold in the clinic became biting. The walls, once sterile and impersonal, now seemed to curve towards the center of the corridor, as if they were closing in, as if they had a life of their own. He felt the space narrowing. The ceiling seemed lower. And the sounds of footsteps, footsteps that weren't his own, echoed behind every turn he hadn't yet taken. He walked out of the archives room with his body stiffening. I walked without knowing where, as if he were guided by something that was in front of him and at the same time inside him. It was then that he saw the patient. A thin man, dressed in a stained uniform, stood in the middle of the corridor. He gently rocked his body back and forth, as if cradling a broken memory. Ethan hesitated, but the patient looked directly at him, with a look far too lucid for someone supposedly in a catatonic state. "You did this to us, remember? You were the first." The sentence exploded like a gunshot inside Ethan's skull. He froze. It wasn't an accusation. There was no anger in the man's voice, just observation, as if he was remembering a truth he had always known, but was only now able to verbalize. "You were the first," repeated the patient, with a slight, empty smile. Ethan took a step back. The ground seemed to shake beneath his feet. "What are you talking about?" But the man had already turned and disappeared through a side door that, until that moment, Ethan was sure had never been there. The hallway was empty again. The silence returned, but now there was something different. It was no longer the silence of waiting. It was the silence of control. The kind of silence that precedes a revelation. The light on the ceiling blinked twice. The third took a while to come. When it finally shined, the environment had changed. The walls now had inscriptions scratched with sharp objects, incoherent sentences, repeated words, disordered numbers. Among them, a message stood out, engraved in thin, deep letters, as if someone had used their fingernails to write it. Unit 06, observation started. The letters looked fresh, still damp with paint, too dark to be ink. Ethan started to remember. Not facts, but of sensations, of stimuli that seemed to have been implanted in his mind like seeds waiting for the right trigger to germinate. He heard footsteps, but they weren't coming from behind. They came from inside. The sound was inside his skull, as if someone was walking in circles inside your head, whispering fragments of commands. You need to remember. You started this. You are not being tested. You are the test. Ethan ran. No direction, no control, just momentum. Doors flashed past him. Each the same, but each containing something different. Behind one of them, he saw his own reflection, but in medical team clothes. Behind another, a dark room with a single chair facing a mirror, and then one that was ajar. Inside, a terminal, connected. The screen showed a folder named Protocol 06, Active Observation. He hesitated. Fingers floated over the keyboard. I didn't know what to type, but his fingers moved on their own, as if they already knew the password. As if that wasn't the first time. The screen flickered. Authorized access, and what appeared there before his eyes was not a medical report. It was a video. Ethan sitting, exactly as before. But this time, he spoke, and he seemed to know that he was being watched. The broadcast was about to start, and what would come next could not be left unattended. Climax and moral dilemma. 7 min to 8 min 30s. Ethan breaks into the medical terminal. Use a code you saw in a dream. On the screen, old recordings, one of them himself holding a syringe. In the background, Dr. Cass's voice. Phase 1 complete. Ethan believes he is a patient. The induced amnesia worked. He falls to his knees. Breathing fails. His hands shake. He screams, but no one hears. If this is real, who am I outside of this lie? The terminal's screen emitted a pulsating bluish light, as if each pixel knew it was about to expose a secret that should never be revealed. Ethan hesitated, his fingertips hovering over the enter key. The code he had entered, he didn't know exactly where it came from. I just remembered seeing him, in a dream, or in something that disguised itself as a dream, but which now, he was almost certain, was implanted memory. The kind of memory that lodges itself in the cracks of the mind, waiting for a spark to ignite. And now, the flame was lit. When he pressed the key, the system did not resist. No extra passwords, no protection. It was as if that terminal wanted to be accessed by him, as if everything was programmed for this moment. The menu opened slowly, as if every second was calculated to amplify the tension. The files loaded in sequence. Old dates, coded names, numbered recordings. A folder stood out in red. Unit 06 Base Protocol. It clicked. The video started with a shaky image of a dark room. The concrete walls, the faint reflection of a hanging lamp swaying as if the air there was in constant imbalance. And then he appeared. Ethan. Sitting, but not like it was now. This Ethan wore a lab coat. He had an upright posture and a firm voice. He was standing in front of another patient, or at least what looked like a patient. Ethan watched the video in complete silence. His own image, or what it appeared to be, held a syringe, applied something. The face maintained a neutral expression, but there was a slight twitch in the corners of the eyes, a micro gesture of hesitation, as if he knew deep down that this was wrong, but he did it anyway. In the background, her voice, calm, methodical, no emotion. Phase 1 complete. Ethan believes he is a patient. The induced amnesia worked. The sentence reverberated like dry thunder in his ears. He lost his balance. He fell to his knees in front of the terminal, as if the words had the weight of an absolute truth that crushed every resistance within him. Breathing failed, like cold. His eyes were watering, but it wasn't sadness. It was disorientation, a silent collapse between identity and memory. The hands shook violently. I tried to hold them, contain them, but it was like trying to control an earthquake with a whisper. His chest heaved as if he were trying to escape from within, and then he screamed. But the sound did not reach the door. Nobody listened. Or perhaps no one else was listening, because everyone already knew, except him. His body fell against the wall of the room, dragging himself into a corner. He shrank as if he were trying to disappear into his own body. As if physically shrinking was a way to escape the mental prison he had been locked in with his own permission. If this is real, he muttered between his teeth. So who am I outside of this lie? The question didn't just hang in the air. It reverberated within him like an inverted echo, as if the words had hit something and returned on another frequency. The inner voice, the one that had been whispering for days, spoke again. But this time she wasn't accusatory. It was serene, persuasive, almost too familiar. You always knew, but you chose to forget. Ethan closed his eyes. For a moment he tried to convince himself that this was a nightmare, a profound delusion of a patient in a relapse. But there was something he could no longer deny. The images, the records, the looks of the other patients, Dr. Cass's silences, Ava's disconnected smiles. Everything conspired towards a single conclusion. He was never a patient. He was never in treatment. The clinic wasn't trying to cure him. She was trying to keep something contained. But what was it? A fragmented consciousness? A version of himself that couldn't be freed? Or something much darker? His gaze returned to the video. The image of the other Ethan was still there, now sitting, filling out forms. On one of the pages it said, Lucid Dissociation Protocol, Unit 06. And then, new audio started playing, a recording clearly taken from a private consultation. Dr. Cass's voice again. The dissonance is stabilizing. The Ethan 06 persona completely believes in his status as a patient. Emotional tests confirm residual empathy. We will begin introducing the real memory fragments in the next phase. Objective, fusion, fusion. That word seemed to trigger something, as if a part of him, until then dormant, was brutally rising again. Images began to pop up inside his mind. Him observing sessions behind mirrored glass, him signing authorizations, himself entering and leaving restricted wards, free without access control. But not as a patient, as an operator, as an architect. And then another image, one that paralyzed him, a black and white engraving with maximum security stamp. Inside a round room without windows, there were 6 chairs. 5 of them were occupied by blindfolded people, connected to wires coming from the ceiling. In the 6th chair, he was. No sails, observing, smiling, as if he was controlling everything, as if I chose to be there. Ethan's legs weakened, the cold in the room intensified, but it was no longer the environment. It was him. The cold came from inside, from the void where there was once certainty. The lights in the room flickered. Once. 2. The 3rd time the video disappeared. On the screen only a new sentence appeared, automatically typed, as if someone were at that exact moment writing to him. Are you ready to remember what you did to patient 04? Ethan stopped. The breath caught in the air. Patient 04. The mind screamed, begging for silence. But the name resonated. And with it, buried memories began to push back the lid on the mental surface, forcing the past to emerge. And the worst was yet to come. Because in the corner of the screen a red light started to flash, and a new notification appeared. Live video access, active. The image loaded, and Ethan was about to see something that no human being should ever see. The screen seemed to resist the new transmission, as if the system itself was aware of what was about to be revealed. Lines of code ran across the monitor at an abnormal speed, and for a moment, Ethan thought this was the system's attempt to protect itself, as if the content was encrypted for security or for shame. But then the image formed, slowly, as if it were being assembled piece by piece, frame by frame. First, a corridor, the one in Ward 7. The cameras showed the entrance to the isolation room, the place where, according to hidden records, only patients in extreme dissociation were taken. None of them ever returned. The image began to shake slightly, as if it were being captured live by an improvised device. And there, right in the center of the frame, Ethan saw himself, but not like he was now. The image on the screen showed a calm, cool Ethan, without any hesitation in his movements. He walked the halls of the clinic with purpose. He carried a clipboard and documents, a badge, and an expression that chilled him to the bone, the expression of someone who not only understood the system, but who had designed it. His mind tried to deny what he saw. It was like facing a distorted version of yourself, but one that moved naturally in that claustrophobic environment. Patients who crossed his path averted their eyes. The medical team bowed slightly as they passed. Was it respect, or was it fear? On screen, the alternate Ethan stopped in front of the door marked Unit 06, entered a code. The door opened. The image darkened. The transmission was cut off for seconds. When he returned, the scene was different. Now the camera showed an observation room. Chairs aligned in a semicircular shape. In the center, a stretcher, ties on the wrists, monitors connected to a still patient's brain, a name stuck to the foot of the bed. Patient 04. Fragmentation level, critical. The silence in the room was absolute. Only intermittent beeps broke the tension. And then, the voice. It wasn't live. It was a recording, but it was clear and familiar. Doctor. Cass's voice explaining in a clinical tone. We started the induction protocol 43 hours ago. Patient 04 showed resistance to the initial dissociation, but the auditory stimuli and false memories caused the base identity to collapse. Ethan is conducting the fusion with the projected pattern. So far, positive response. The image shook again. Now it showed Ethan, the same one from the previous recording, holding a syringe. The same syringe. His eyes fixed on the patient. It slowly injects the contents. The patient twitches but does not scream, because he's too sedated to react. The machine beeps. A solid line appears on the heart rate monitor. Then, silence. Ethan in the video removes the syringe, hands it to the assistant and leaves the room without looking back. The real Ethan in front of the terminal was no longer breathing regularly. His teary eyes seemed to tear at the image before him. The question pulsed, no longer as doubt but as despair. If this is me, who was I before this? Because now there was no room left for assumptions. He wasn't just being manipulated. He had been the manipulator, the architect of other people's pain, the mind that oversaw collapsing minds. Dr. Cass's words echoed like knives. Ethan believes he is a patient. The induced amnesia worked. The system needs him to forget what he saw. Only then can he be reinstated. The reinstatement. Was that the real goal? They weren't trying to cure him. They were trying to bring him back to the role he himself had abandoned, or fled, or maybe deleted, deliberately, like software that chooses to reprogram itself for safety, for repentance. Ethan started mumbling nonsense words, disjointed syllables, as if searching within the language itself for a reversal code. The screen changed again. Now it showed hidden files, patient records, all of them with a common denominator: Observation Protocol Ethan. Every single one of the inmates he had encountered over the past few weeks, they were all listed as field cases, some with disturbing notes. Patient 11, successfully induced suicide. Patient 03, emotional response maintained for 28 days, excluded due to ethical resistance. Patient 06, continuous observation, potential fusion with primary identity. His name was on all of them. He was the invisible link, the piece that united everyone else's suffering, and worse, he was the example. The monitor now showed a graph, a visual scheme that indicated phases of memory implantation, psychological disguises, traumatic activation protocols. Highlighted, the following sentence. Unit 06, Phase 3, Conscious Dissociation. Ethan's hands gripped the edge of the table. Nails dug into the metal. The body trembled as if it were fragmenting, as if every bone wanted to flee in the opposite direction. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. His throat was closed, his mind was numb. But the heartbeat, strong, desperate, as if he was trying to compensate for the void that was opening up in his psyche. In the corner of the room, a noise. The swivel chair he had left aside and spun by itself. Ethan turned slowly. Nothing, or rather no one. But on the floor, next to the chair, there was something new. A brown envelope, without a return address, sealed with red wax. He knelt down. He took the object. When he opened it, he found a single sheet, a yellowed paper folded twice at the top, written in handwritten letters. If you're reading this, then you're back. Below, a sentence. The same one he heard in one of his first dreams, but now read as a revelation. The real psychopath is the one who decides to forget. The room lights flickered again. On the monitor, a new notification. Protocol 06, final integration in progress. And the counting began. 10, 9, 8. Ethan closed his eyes. Heavy breathing. Something inside him regrouped. It wasn't just memory. It was consciousness. Fragments colliding, truths merging. And there, in the background of the metallic sound of the beeps, the voice returned. Stronger, more real. And he said just one thing. You know what you did to patient 04. Now, it's your turn. They created a code, a hidden trigger among voices, memories, and lies, but only those who still remember can decipher. Comment, Yusu OCs, and prove that dissociation has not yet erased everything. Because in the next episode, even your most intimate thoughts will be tested, and Ethan won't be the only one under observation.